Hello, agus tíaghaíomh tá bras sásta bheith le chorála ceanna in tú inniuh Peadar Tóibín. Peadar, welcome. Thank you for coming. So I'd like to welcome back our audience and say thank you for joining us again here on Protect Life and to try to keep the conversation going, breaking the consensus. We'd invite you to subscribe to the page, to like us, so you know when we have new material up. The fight goes on, and sadly the battles proliferate. So if you can help us at all, there's a little donate button there. If you can click on that, anything at all you can give would be most welcome. So Peadar, we are where we are, but how did we get there? So tell us a little bit about what's the world, what is the family that Peadar Tóibín is born into?
Well, I'm a Navan man, true and true. I've come from a big family. I'm the youngest of 7 children. My father was in business, as was his father. It was actually my grandfather set up the first garage in County Meath in around 1914, 1915. And so I was born and raised in that household, if you like. My father would have been, let's say, from a Fianna Fáil family. My grandmother would have been involved in Cumann na mBan. She was from Trim. And there would have been that natural inclination towards Fianna Fáil from my father's side. Now, my father would have been a business person, small business person, had a garage and petrol pumps and that kind of stuff. But he would have also been, let's say, of a practical side. So anybody who would have made life better for him economically and made it easier for him to raise his family, he would have also considered for a vote as well. My mother's from Westmeath. She would have come from a Fine Gael family. A very strong marriage. A mixed marriage, indeed. And actually, my grandfather on that side would have gone back to General McOwen in Longford as such. So there was a very strong loyalty to that side of Fine Gael. But my mother probably would have lost interest in Fine Gael in around the late 80s when she felt that Fine Gael was going in a different direction than she had hoped. So the family was a very political family. Every dinner table in our household was full of discussions, debates, and even rows. And our instinct as kids was always to take the opposite position from our parents.
Right.
And so I think that was a good thing, because what we did was we tested and pushed to the limits the views that our parents and the values that our parents had. And my parents would have been, let's say, traditional in many sense, but wouldn't have been dogmatic. Would have been about, my father was a mechanic, and he would have come from that kind of engineering instinct and would have been well read, so people had to prove their points with regard to evidence and logic as well. It wasn't just a case that such and such a thing is a dogma and therefore you must believe it.
I think the engineering instinct is one. I think we should have far more engineers in politics, because the one thing they want to know is, does it work?
Sure.
Not necessarily interested in the deep physics of the thing, but will it, if you build it, will it stay up? And if you make it, will it keep going?
For sure.
And I think that's a wonderful instinct we don't pay enough attention to.
There is a practicality that generation had, which was a necessity in their times, because there was less supports for people when, if people fell down, they had to pick themselves up more by themselves then. And that practicality was a wonderful thing. And actually, I think one of the things definitely I got from my parents was, a practical, nature, just do it. And as you say yourself, I remember working for a builder years ago, and, holidays from college, and there's 3 or 4 builders around, and they're all fretting about how to do this and how to do that. And the builder was, just get it up. Was so just go ahead and do it was the idea there. In my time when I was young, I suppose one of the first major political events that affected me probably was the hunger strikes. So yes. I grew up at a time, I was about 6 or 7 years of age, and the screens were full of these really, really dramatic and difficult scenes of hundreds of thousands of people following hearses in Belfast and other places in the north of Ireland. And we wouldn't have been a Republican family whatsoever, to be honest. My mother would have had no time for it. And I remember at the time, my mother would have been of the view that this was an orchestrated plan by the Republican movements to generate as much sympathy as they could, as well. But I remember that's definitely having an impact. The dinner tables, the discussions were about emigration, which was a really big issue at the time. It was about the culture wars that were happening at the time, divorce and abortion and those issues. And it was obviously of the north of Ireland. And also times were pretty tough economically too. Do you know what I mean? You know, our family would have experienced, you know, we would have never gone hungry, but we knew the value of things as well, if you know what I mean.
I mean, politically as well, being in Meath, you've got Louth beside you, where you have, was it Bellew was elected in the general election on a hunger strike ticket, and there was a TD elected, I think, in Cavan Monaghan.
There were two hunger strikers elected in the 1981 election in those two constituencies, and even I know in Navan, my hometown, there was a small caravan was opened up in the centre of the town, and placards were put up. There was a tension around, you know, right around the country at that time. There was palpable tension.
There was. I remember as a kid, I would have been 12, I suppose, at the time. But I vividly remember going to Mass on a Sunday morning, these black flags around the place. And it's very hard to explain to people now who weren't there. But there was an atmosphere, which I to be honest, I've never remembered before or since in the country. Yes. There was a very strange atmosphere around the place. It left, there was and people had a real sense that something was happening, and it obviously affected you because it
did. And I started to read about Padraig Pearson as a young gossan. I started to read, you know, Tim Pat Coogan's books on the troubles in the north, and just tried to get an understanding of it. I remember around the age of 14, I bought An Phoblacht home to the house, and my mother got it and she clipped me across the head with it and said, "Don't ever bring this back into the house again." And definitely the emotional intensity of the sacrifice that the hunger strikers made at the time definitely switched on an interest I had into wondering and understanding how could these people make such a sacrifice. What were they doing it, and what was the background of this? And so, you know, at that stage, then I was going through school, and I said, okay, I would definitely like to get involved in politics. I said I decided to study politics and economics in university. And
so you were in school in Navan. Did you go to the famous classical?
We went to St. Pat's Classical School. So by the time I got to it now, there was only Latin left in it. Now I was forced to study Latin for 3 years of my youth.
And a bit of Latin does no harm to you. It's no burden after it.
It's funny because I love the Irish language, but I never took to Latin, unfortunately.
I was a Latin fan. I did Latin for the intern. We weren't allowed to do it after that. They got rid of it in the Brothers. It's a football school as well. Did you kick a football?
I played a lot of hurling, and you know, people don't associate County Meath with hurling at all. So I played hurling for Navan and Mahoney's. I played hurling for my school. I captained my primary school to a county championship, and you know, I love the hurling. I played up until about 19. When I got to about 21 years old, where I basically learned about nightclubs, and then the world of nightclubs and hurling came to a conflict about 10 o'clock in the morning on a hurling pitch on a Sunday morning, and I knew that one had to go, unfortunately. And I regret it because for many years I wanted to get back into the hurling, but it's actually one of those sports that when you get back into it as an adult, you never play as fearlessly as you did when you were a kid. You know?
And I remember it just being with a group of Meath men one time who were passionate about their football, absolutely passionate. And while Wexford has it has a football history where it's hurling that really does it for us. And I commented in all innocence, a comment I remember from a Tipperary hurler who said once to me, football, sure, it's a grand game for fit men who can't hurl.
Well, definitely
didn't go down well.
Well, like, hurling is a beautiful sport. Just technically, from my perspective, it's a far more interesting sport. The individual technical skills that are necessary to maintain the ball, you know what I mean, is absolutely wonderful. So
I don't know. This is something just off. There's a big issue these days we're talking about. identity and nationality and race and things. And it seems hurling is this quintessentially Irish thing. And I don't know what you think, but one of the things I think that we've been very lucky, and maybe give the GA credit for this, that they've been aware of this and they've used this, that Gaelic games have been a way of integrating people and giving people a sense of participation in a national identity and a culture that haven't come from generations and generations in the one parish, as so often the case, but have come from countries from all over the world. I think there's a wonderful gift in that.
I think so.
And say, and people say, "Oh, but he's not Irish either." And then you look at them and say, "What you say? He hurls."
I know.
He hurls for the club. And that is as Irish as you can be. You hurl for the club. And
I think, first of all, I think the GAA is probably the most successful Irish organisation there exists. It gives every single boy or girl in every parish in the country an opportunity to play a competitive sport. And like that, you know, it allows people from all over the world to come to Ireland and participate in the sport too. The Irish language would have been a big issue for me as well when I was growing up, as part of my identity too. And here's a wee secret: I was christened Peadar Tóibín, and but I came to a certain age, and I decided that, you know, I wanted to revert back to the original spelling and pronunciation of my surname. So I decided to go by Peadar Tóibín as well. But there's an organisation called Imask, and many people from all over the world who now live in Ireland join Imask, and they learn the Irish language. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see, you know, people from different countries speak the language probably more fluently than many of our own citizens do.
Yeah, it's a pity that I think there's an element there, do you think, that we have a lack of confidence or courage. I think an awful lot of us have a lot more Irish than we think we do.
We do. I think that there's a couple of elements to it. I believe that the state and the media hasn't given the importance to the language that it deserves. So, in other words, people see the value in something sometimes by how it's reflected through the state and through the media. And because the state don't really use the language, and they tell you to learn it in school for 13 years. But once you leave school, they won't actually allow you to use the language with the state organization. So you can't go to the tax office or to the health service or to, you know, the county council and do your business in Irish at all. So it tells you that the language is only for school. And if we really want to give the language back a value, the state has to say, okay, after learning this language for 13 years, you're entitled to use it in your engagements with the state. Now people go, well, that's going to cost a heap of money. Truth of the matter is, it won't. All you do is employ people in the state that have a level of language ability, so that when they're doing their work, they pick up the phone, they can do their work in Irish or English. The second thing that we have to do is we have to tell parents, you know, that there's a real value in this language, and that if you raise your kids in this language, it will be of serious use to them into the future. Because the easiest way to actually pick up a language is through your parents. And I speak Irish to my kids since they were born. And I wouldn't have been massively fluent when my first child was born, but it's amazing as a parent, in its daily use, your language improves radically. The only time I actually speak English now currently to my kids is when I'm really technical, and then they know they're in trouble. So when they...
So was it, the hunger strikes are 1981. That's obviously a big part of your narrative. 1983 comes along, and we have the referendum to implement the Eighth Amendment. Were you aware of it? Did this impact on you?
I was. My mother would have campaigned. She would have canvassed and knocked on doors. It would have been part of the discussions. Our family was a big human rights family, and we believed that human rights are really important in a republic, that all citizens should be fully equal and entitled to human rights. And the idea of the right to life being the most important human right, upon which every other human right is actually dependent upon. Sure. And the idea was that human rights, by their very nature, are universal. So if you separate one level of humanity out of a human right, you cannot even call it a human right anymore. It's a sectoral right after that. And the idea that unborn human beings, and And we have to remember that we're talking about a living individual human being. The unborn child is alive. It grows independently by itself, obviously supported by its mother. It doesn't have the same DNA and the same genetic makeup as either of its parents, and is evidently a human being. Otherwise, what species would it be? So we're talking about an individual living human being. And if you deny one section of humanity human rights, well, then it's no longer a human right. And I think, unfortunately, not enough of us articulate the issue through the prism of human rights. Because if you do, well, then you can logically say that the parties like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Labour and Sinn Féin, they are no longer human rights parties. Yeah. They do not support universal human rights for all of humanity in our country. And that's a shocking thing.
This is, in a sense, it is, if you're going to define one value as being the foundational value of what it means to be a republic in its broadest sense, it's that each person, each human being in the republic is treated equally and has value and is respected by the republic. We are all individually. When sometimes people say to me, "Why are you here? Why do you get to speak?" I say, "Well, because I'm here as a citizen of this republic.
Exactly.
I don't need any other qualification. That's all I need."
I agree. Like a republic is a wonderful thing. It is a structure which says to each and every individual, no matter high up or low down they are, no matter what their level of ability is, their level of intellect, their any element of their character, that they are an individual, they are a citizen, and they are equal to every single other individual within that state. And that's the idea, I believe, of the Republic, of the proclamation of the Irish Republic. And the lines of that is that we must cherish all of the children of the nation equally. And that's a very important sentence for us in Aontú. And we believe that wholeheartedly.
So you go to college and you study politics?
Went to UCD, studied politics and economics, and I studied economics in large part because I knew that there are two elements. There's usually two skill sets that are necessary in politics. One is law, or the other is economics. Economics is far rarer as a skill set in the political sphere in Ireland, and it's probably more important because this country has gone from economic catastrophe to economic catastrophe. So my instinct was that if I was going to tool myself up to be able to add value to the political system, studying economics would be one of the best ways to do that.
So at that stage, you were already thinking of yourself, you wanted to be political. That was
I would say, to be honest, since without a shadow of a doubt, since my very early, like since even primary school, it would have been my objective to be a political activist or to be involved in politics.
So at this stage, had you actually joined a party, or when did you?
I did. I joined another secret. I joined Fianna Fáil. I joined the Kevin Barry Cumann in UCD, and I was a member of that Cumann for about 2 years. And many of the names you see in the political sphere right now would have gone through that particular Cumann. I enjoyed my time in that Cumann. I was a PRO for it. There was two types of people in the Fianna Fáil Cumann back in about 1992-93. There was about a third of the membership who I saw as ideological, people like myself, people who believed in the Republic, people who wanted to see Irish unity, people who wanted to see economic justice, people who were committed to the human rights to life. They made up about a third of the membership, and they were the people I related to. There was about 2/3 of the membership then who were what I would call personally ambitious individuals who just wanted to get on in life. And they would jump on any elevator that would allow them to do that. And that's a normal human trait. I'm not necessarily castigating that. People do want to get on. They study hard in college. They work hard to get on individually. That's fine. But my worry was at the time.
Transactional approach.
But my worry at the time was that these individuals would literally, they had no foundations, they had no compass, and really they would take any decisions necessary, politically speaking, in future to be able to get on in their own lives. And I think we see that element has come to the fore radically within Fianna Fáil.
Oh, yeah.
Over the last 20 years.
They are, in a sense, there was no core.
Exactly. I sometimes say that Fianna Fáil currently, not everybody, there's a decent element of Fianna Fáil still, but the majority of Fianna Fáil is a hollow ideological husk. In other words, it has no core internally to it. It has become, like Fine Gael, probably Fine Gael less so, Fianna Fáil has become an individual franchise. So do you know when you're a franchise, whatever shop or restaurant it is, you buy the franchise, you put the sign over the door, you wear the t-shirt, and then you are Mr. Such and Such in that area. Fianna Fáil is like that. So you buy the Fianna Fáil franchise, you stand for their election, you open an office, and you become the Fianna Fáiler there. But there's very little, it's individual ambitions that's driving it. It's not necessarily an ambition for the country, the ambition for the community. And that's why you see when, Fianna Fáilers are fighting in elections, they often fight each other far more than, let's say, the opposition in that constituency, because they're driven by the desire to achieve for themselves rather than achieve for the country.
A commentator I heard recently said that historically, one of the questions that people would ask in Irish politics was, what was Fine Gael for? Because the answer tended to be, well, to be not Fianna Fáil. And that today, that situation is kind of reversed. Well, what's Fianna Fáil for? And he said that the unkind answer is Fianna Fáil exists as a vehicle to make Micheál Martin Taoiseach.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that's it's kind or unkind, or does it resonate with you?
Well, I don't want to be unkind either, but I will say one thing. I do believe that that Micheál Martin is probably the primary example of that characteristic that I saw in the Kevin Barry coming in UCD back in 93, 94, of the individual that will stick their finger in the wind to find out which way the wind is blowing and then go that direction to achieve what they need to achieve. And I think that has done untold damage to Fianna Fáil. Because I'll tell you, there's two things that a political party needs if it wants to be successful in Ireland. It needs an ideological core that is of such importance that it will gather decent people in to give their time to work hard. Or it needs to be the natural party of government, and whereby personal ambition is satisfied by being part of that. Now, Fianna Fáil has become neither in recent times. It's no longer the natural party of government, and it doesn't have really strong core values that actually drive people to achieve for the betterment of society. I recognize that in 93, 94, and it was confirmed for me just from the crisis that went on in Fianna Fáil ever since.
So 93, 94, you're in Kevin Barry, Common, which, as you say, many great careers have been launched from Kevin Barry Common. Also, I'm told it's the funnest Common of all the political organisations in Europe. Know how to have a bit of Ogra know how to enjoy themselves, but something obviously is not satisfactory for you at that stage. So you leave Fianna Fáil for Sinn Féin, or is there a period where you just attached, or what is that moment? What's the driving force? Is it a process, or?
I kind of asked myself, did I want to become the kind of politician that, let's say, jumps on the elevator to achieve whatever is necessary to get there? Or did I want to invest my time and effort into something that I actually believed in solidly, some real objective that I could help achieve, something that would change the country for the better quite significantly? And I didn't want to be the former at all, and I couldn't have gone in that direction. And at the time, there was a person by the name of Liam Reichenberg, who was from South Armagh, not a familiar name in South Armagh, but a good fella, and he stood for Sinn Féin in a students' union election in UCD around 94, 95, and I left Fianna Fáil. I didn't join Sinn Féin at the time. I got behind his particular campaign. He did really well. I think he got about 20% of the vote, when at the time Sinn Féin had about 2% of the vote nationally. And so that was my first, let's say, shift into that kind of political space. And then I started obviously working, and started a paying my own rent and after college, and after a couple of years said, okay, I'm going to join Sinn Féin locally to see what I can do in that organisation there.
So when you become involved in the party at that time, it has been observed, I would say, more than once about Sinn Féin certainly in the Republic, that it comes in two colours. Some is green and some is red, and that there wasn't always a happy coexistence. Some wanted, the green was kind of a distraction and we have to move on from that, and the others, the red was a bit of a turn off. If we were to accept that kind of binary rainbow, where did you feel that you fitted in, or what, or were you? Well, green and red makes orange, I suppose.
No, I think your analysis is spot on. And first of all, I was of very much the green side, the Irish unity sides. I wanted to see proper All Ireland institutions developed. I also felt that nationalists and Catholics in the north of Ireland were treated fairly with regards jobs, with regards civil rights, with regards having the ability to speak on radio and television, to have their political representatives properly speak in favour of them, with regards a lot of damage that was being done by the state's forces in the north against them. So even in the 80s and the 90s, it was still very clear that nationalists in the north were second-class citizens. So that's where my instincts lay. And you're right, there was two wings of the party. There was the hardcore socialists, maybe in Derry City and Belfast and in Dublin. And then there was the nationalists and Republicans of Tyrone and Monaghan and of Derry and Donegal. And these people, to be honest, weren't that far probably from the Fianna Fáil voter in the likes of Leitrim or the likes of Mayo or the likes of Cavan. They probably, there were GAA people that went to Mass. They had the same cultural values. But it was just that they were still in a state that was in flux around the issue of identity with and the constitutional issues, and that's one of the reasons why they're. So, and one thing I will say is, whatever you think about Gerry Adams, Gerry Adams had the political, let's say, gravity to be able to hold those two wings of the party together in a coexistence. Now, in my analysis, when Mary Lou took over, that radically changed. So the party shifted to the left significantly, both economically and culturally. The United Ireland element of the party took a step back and had less of an influence in the development. And when I saw that happening, I felt, well, the party's changing it radically. There's no way I can continue with the party.
Just to get a sense of the timeline, are you coming into the party around the 1997?
Yeah, so around the Good Friday Agreement, I'm coming into the party, and I
suppose really what I wanted to ask was, would you have felt comfortable joining in the absence of the peace process?
I suppose there was a lot of reasons why. Right through the Troubles, I would have felt that the reason for the Troubles, was the injustice of the northern states. First of all, it was the partition of Ireland, which I felt was radically wrong. Secondly, it was the fact that the partition state then had an inbuilt discrimination against a sizable minority within that state. And that if that injustice were to continue, that there would naturally rise up a section of society that first of all would try to achieve justice through peaceful means, and we saw that through the civil rights marches in the north of Ireland. And then we saw the very violent reaction of the British state in Derry during the Bloody Sunday marches against that civil rights. So I felt that the way that the northern injustice were managed by the British state, had ended up in this intractable, violent situation. I was of a strong believer that, the only way to create a peaceful situation was to create a pathway for people to achieve justice through peaceful means. And obviously, when the Good Friday Agreement and the whole peace process was created, when you saw that Albert Reynolds and John Hume and Gerry Adams shaking hands and setting out a project. But then it became clear to me that actually that justice could be achieved peacefully, and that we could start to end the war that was happening in the north. And to be honest, the war in the north, when I was a kid, and I'm sure when you were a kid as well, it did seem intractable. It did seem like there was South Africa, there was Palestine, and there was the north of Ireland, and these were like conflicts that were just nearly everlasting. And every day we turned the news on, and there was another heartbreaking killing or travesty or injustice happening. So when 95, 96, 97 were coming about, there was really a hope that there was a change in the air, that there was a possibility in the air. So I joined in that scenario.
When you come into the party, I mean, in the 90s, the life issue isn't a big issue really. It's not on anybody's horizons really, and maybe that's something we can get back to. Maybe there's a problem there. Mm. But you go into Sinn Féin with a party with different polarities than certainly than Fianna Fáil at the time. Did you feel comfortable as a pro-life person? Was it an issue? Was there a conflict there? Was it a party that was, shall we say, maybe had a different multiplicity of views, but those views were
there were two wings to that issue as well. There was a very hardcore extreme element within the party at that time, and there were a couple of Ordeshna in which they got the upper hand, etc. But those motions were quickly reversed. And I was, people like Gerry Adams, like Martin McGuinness, and later on people like Pierce Doherty, etc. They stated very clearly that they supported the human right to life, and that they opposed 100% abortion in Ireland. So there was definitely enough people within the organisation to convince me and hundreds of others that there was a welcome element, that we were welcome within the party, etc. Now, I'll be honest, there was always I felt at times a slight feeling amongst people of a slight us and them feeling. Not a north-south element at all, but there was some element within the party that would have always slightly made people like myself uncomfortable and unwelcome. Would have manifested itself in slagging or banter or etc. But it's hard to crystallize exactly what it was, but there were definitely lines of delineation understood to a certain extent.
If you like, it was a fault line.
There were. Now, there weren't massive fault lines. They weren't always visible, but there was always something in the background to say that there are two elements to this organisation.
When did you start to feel that, having come from the position where you had people like, say, Martin McGuinness and Adams in the north, who obviously gave gave a heavy anchor to a certain position? It was very hard to say that they couldn't oppose you personally when you had these very senior figures. When did you feel or start to feel that maybe the tide was moving in a direction, and that it was moving in a way perhaps irrevocably?
Well, basically in around 2000, there's a very interesting debate, and I think there's a study that has to be done on this. In around, in 2011 or 2010, Sinn Féin had a membership of about 6,000 people, okay? Yeah. And most of those people were members long term. There were, I would say, of the green element that we mentioned earlier, the United Irelanders, etc. Then you must remember, in the south of Ireland especially, there was a big economic catastrophe. Many people lost their houses. People were in mortgage distress, and many people were just, lost their jobs. It was real major difficulty, and there was a big dislodging of the political elements of Irish society. So many Fianna Fáil people, Fine Gael people, Labour, etc., were all being dislodged from their political loyalties. And in that swell, there was the Right to Water campaign. The Right to Water campaign was taking hundreds of thousands of people onto the streets. And, you know, I would have been very much part of that Right to Water campaign. I was the chairperson for the Right to Water campaign in my own county. But what happened there, that Right to Water campaign was being led in many ways by the real extreme hard left, the Trotskyite element within Irish politics. As time went by, many of those dislodged people politically saw Sinn Féin as the vehicle to achieve justice for them with regards to mortgages, with regards to rent, with regards to jobs, etc. And the membership of Sinn Féin then by 2014 was about 12,000. So the party actually doubled in size in 4 years. And any organization that doubles in size in 4 years it's very hard to integrate all that new membership into the party and still hold your culture, your objectives, your political nature exactly the same. So, you know, and one of people don't realize this, but many of the conflicts, the fights, the battles, papers are full of councillors being bullied here, this happening here. Many of that was actually the two elements, the new Sinn Féin and the old Sinn Féin, coming into conflict with each other. And it was like oil and water in many ways. One Sinn Féin had, the older one had the Martin McGuinness attitude towards the right to life. The other Sinn Féin had a far more, let's say, extreme elements around the human rights to life. And that latter element then started to take positions on local commons, local Corley counter, at Ard level, at Ard Corley level, and also start to get elected in the local elections and in the European elections. And then they were well placed to become elected to the Dáil, some of them in 2016. So there was a cultural change within Sinn Féin, a radical cultural change, shifted to further to the left economically and to the left socially between 2011 and 2016. Now, don't get me wrong, I would see myself as left of centre economically. I want to see like, and you know, people do well. I want to see people who work hard and, you know, get paid properly, for people who invest in education, who invest in businesses, who, you know, do as much as they can for themselves. They are entitled to good economic compensation for that. But I also believe strongly that there has to be a safety net underneath people in times of trouble as well. But just to finish that point, so there was a cultural difference that radically happened between 2011 and 2014. The Red, as you mentioned earlier, got the upper hand radically within the political party. And then the middle management of the party and people like maybe Peadar Tóibín saw the winds of change happening in that. And then they changed their own political views around those issues. They evolved. They went on the journey. So like I would have had conversations with some of those people who 2 years previously would have convinced me without a shadow of a doubt that they were on my side. And all of a sudden, within 2 years later, they were radically on the other side. And I remember a certain Ardeshna speaking to those people, very high ranking, some of them TDs, and they would say, this is not going to happen. All the common in our party or in our county are going to vote against it. And 2 weeks later, then they changed. They were coming out in the media, changing for it. Also, I will say one thing as well, and I don't want to over-egg this point, but the democratic structure within Sinn Féin is also deeply problematic for the party itself. You know, I think that they need to work hard in reforming it. It has the infrastructure of democracy. So in other words, it has an Ardesh where people are put motions forward, and motions are voted upon. But the truth of the matter is, the power is in an organisation called the Ard Corlea. And the Ard Corlea only has 12 people elected from the Ardesh. But the vast majority are actually either appointed by the leader of the party or are elected from other aspects of the party, which doesn't have the same franchise at all, much smaller franchises, and often, little or no franchise at all. So the Ard Corlea then has a group called the National Officer Board. And the National Officer Board is made up of about 10 people. And when the National Officer Board makes a decision, it might be a split decision, 6-4, but all of the 10 must come out of the National Officer Board with one view. And then it goes into the Ard Corlea and it makes its arguments for a position. And even if the Ard Corlea splits, at the end of it, all the Ord Chorlaí must come out with exactly the same view.
With one view?
With one view.
That's in the old days. The Politburo always had to have...
Well, it's a phenomenally centralized system. And then the elected reps see which way the wind is blowing. And then all of a sudden you have a group of about 400 or 500 people who are going into an Ardesh, who are the most senior, most respected, most influential people within that Ardesh. And that it means when motions are discussed and debated, that is, at 99% of the time, they will correlate to what the officer board's decision was initially.
When we move forward, the campaign to repeal the 8th Amendment gains purchase, it's there, it's coming on. Did you know pretty well in your heart that this was going to be a subject, or did you think that the party might offer you, or people like you, the chance to coexist, that it could be a concept?
Yes. Well, just one point on the last. When we formed Aontú, we formed with the objective of making sure that we didn't have that top-down political centralism, the democratic centralism, as you mentioned, that it would be a grassroots organization, that members would be able to have their views argued, debated, and passed if they had the majority. I suppose I saw obviously that this change was happening within Sinn Féin. I saw also that, you know, many of the other establishment parties are putting the finger in the air.
Yes.
You know, that's the Trots in the Dáil, the Trotskyites in the Dáil were pushing this really hard, so that the media, you know, very much were aligned to pushing this objective as well. So at that time then, a group of us within the party started to say, okay, let's try to get a freedom of conscience motion passed in the Dáil, which would, on this issue alone, allow for individual members to have freedom of conscience. And that was a phenomenally difficult and damaging and battle, because we would go to Cummins and we'd speak to members and they would say, yes, no, we want freedom of conscience for this. And then the party has a spine within it called the organisers. The organisers are paid by the party to manage and organise the party at each county level. And many of those organisers and other elements of the party started to go about to the same Cummins and say, no, we have to listen to the leadership on this. Freedom of conscience is not a good idea. I know where motions were stopped, you know, by individuals within Cummins. If a motion was passed, a vote had to be taken again, and we'd have different members at those Cummins. Where Cummins actually passed it, their motion would never get to head office whatsoever. That you would have a situation where Cummins were to meet to have a debate on it, and then the secretary of the Cummins told actually no, that a Cummins meeting was not to go ahead, where the chairperson would arrive at the Cummins hall and nobody else would be there in case there was a meeting to discuss the issue. So then it got very clear that if we were to use the democratic infrastructure to achieve even freedom of conscience, that we would have the paid individuals of the organisation trying to stop that. And at the time, remember that as a TD, I was taking the average industrial wage and giving my money back to the party so that they could employ these people. So many ways I was paying money to employ people who were working against my democratic right within the party, just to see could we achieve issues like freedom of conscience. So 3 or 4 times we went to the Ardesh. We managed to get 30 or 40 Cummins across the line on it and put their names to motions initially. And at probably the first Ardesh, it was a 60-40 split. But then people like me at grassroots level said, well, there's no space for us. And they started to fall away. So it had the double element. One, the other side of the debate was growing stronger, and our side of the debate were just leaving the party.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense.
It does. It becomes more uniform then over time. And one of the problems, though, as well, is that many people would leave the party, but then they would just disappear like snow off a ditch and take no role in political activism any further. And such was the reach of the party into people's minds, was people would leave the party all right, but they would feel guilty about setting up a alternative solution to Republican politics in Ireland. So many people just remained as independents or just left political activism totally.
So the day came and went, and I think, I don't know, if you were, I think many people were surprised, not necessarily by the loss, but the margin and the size of the loss. And a lot of people talk to me and they're saying, well, how did this happen? And I suppose a lot of us have reflected on that. And I think I'd be curious on your opinion that in a funny kind of a way, the Eighth Amendment made pro-life people in Ireland complacent, in the way that in other countries, say in the United States, where the debate has been a continual, ongoing debate since Roe versus Wade, and where you have seen incremental successes year in, year out, that in a sense, you had one side of the debate which knew exactly what it wanted to do and how it was going to achieve it. And it kept working and working and working. And the other side of the debate almost went absent. We had the amendment, we succeeded in that. We didn't need to do anything. And that, in a sense, the support, the cultural support within society was eaten away from underneath without us, people on the pro-life side really becoming aware, and that we had failed to engage on the issue in a way that the opposition had not done. They had kept working.
Yeah, there's a number of things. First of all, I suppose people were shocked by the results of it. But we have to remember that this change was happening over years, and incremental change, and a change that probably accelerated over the probably 2 years in advance to it. We also have to remember that there isn't an Irish political, let's say, or there isn't an Irish media institution that, first of all, would stand up for the views that we hold dear. So in most republics and most democracies, there's a left-wing and a right-wing media, there's a liberal and a conservative media, there is a pro-European and an anti-European media. In Ireland, we don't have that. We don't have those wings. We have, most media is very much sitting on the same, there's a little bit of difference, all right, but it's mostly on the same spot. Especially on issues such as the right to life. So there was, first of all, no oxygen for those of us who had a different view, media-wise, to articulate that view in advance of the referendum. But there was no consistent, articles and measures. And I'll just give you a small example of how that works. So, for example, every single week, in 3 years before the referendum, most newspapers and radio stations and television stations would have given us the number of women who they said were forced to go to England for an abortion. And I use the word forced in inverted commas there because, people choose to go to England as such. And, we want to see people choose to have their children and be able to raise their children and have the confidence to be able to raise their children. So now, since that referendum, there has been probably, you can count on one hand, the amount of articles that have appeared with regard to the amount of abortions that are happening in Ireland at the moment. So in other words, there's been a blackout of information with regards to the daily occurrences of abortion in Ireland since, and that's in stark contrast to the flashing neon lights of figures that existed prior to the referendum. So before anybody has to give an opinion in the media on what's right or what's wrong or what we should or shouldn't do, just the absence of information on one side of the debate and the proliferation of information on the other side of the debate has a radical impact into the decisions that we all make. So that's the first element, and that's hegemony, that homogenous element within the media currently is still so uniform. It's still probably one of the most dangerous aspects of the Irish media systems that we have. The second issue, and I met a tutor that I had in UCD a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to him about the changes that have happened north and south and the right to life. And he said to me, and I thought it was really, really important, he said to me, he says, pro-life people, he says, they're wonderful people, they're so passionate, but he says, Peadar, they're the most disorganized politically in the world. And he made that radical, a very important point, that you can have all the passion in the world with regards to your political views on the right to life. But if you don't organize, they're not worth a hill of beans. And if you put, you put 10 pro-lifers into a room, after an hour, there'll be 12 opinions in that room. And that's the thing. And you know, I tell you, people, you know, that will say to me, Peadar, you know, I think it's great what you've done in A2. The right to life is the most important thing to me going. And then so, well, why don't you join us and give us a hand? Oh, I'm not sure about your opinion on regional enterprise. And I go, but is regional enterprise the most important thing? Oh, not at all. So they, you know, so in other words, people have this kind of strange view that they want the understanding. They're looking for a political party that holds 100% of their views.
Yes.
If you're waiting for a political party that holds 100% of your views, you'll have to wait forever, or there'll be one person in that party, and that will be you. So there's a couple of elements. There's very little political organization within the pro-life element, and hasn't been for years. And also Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, you know, the great catch-all parties have articulated a certain view with no real intent and no real core. And once they fell away, you know, people were just, you know, homeless with regards their political loyalties as well. So there's
left sometimes with an ancestral loyalty, which impedes them from moving on.
I spoke to a wonderful guy up in Monaghan, and he's a Fianna Fáiler, and strong rights to life instincts. And he says to me, Peadar, you're 100% right. He says that Aontú represents the grassroots of Fianna Fáil far more than Micheál Martin does. And I said, well, John, will you take out membership in Aontú? Oh, he says, my grandfather would turn in his grave.
Great, yeah.
And I says, to be honest, I said, John, would your grandfather not turn in his grave now, knowing that you're in a political party that facilitated this, knowing that you guys had a TD that's from Mayo who stood up in the Dáil and said that abortion regret was makey-uppy. You know, that Micheál Martin was one of the major engines of change with regards to this particular issue. Do you not think that loyalty to a political party that's no longer loyal to your objectives is self-defeating in the long run? And we have dozens, hundreds of really decent people still members of the political establishment, hoping that someday that there will be, you know, radical change in those parties, and those parties will start to refocus on their values. But every day they spend in those political parties, they are actively doing damage to their own core values. And that's why I would say to people, we have a website, aontú.ie. On that website, there is a tab called membership. Click on that tab, do yourself a favor, and start to be part of an all-Ireland movement of change that actually represents your political views.
Not to be dwelling, shall we say, on the disaster, but there were, I think, I mean, if we want to sift through them, some signs of positivity, and maybe I think even a sign of positivity regarding pro-life voters becoming a little bit more savvy, a bit more organized, a bit more recognition of where they have to be. In the last general election, I mean, let's not put a tooth in it. Sinn Féin were after your seat, and they were after it big time. And you can smile and say, oh, I don't know, but I know that at the level of resources and personnel and time that was invested in taking your seat, they give it the good old college try, and you were elected. And I mean, it's never in a three-seater in me. It's never going to be comfortable, but fairly comfortably. And I think a lot of people, if they were down in the bookies, would have hesitated to back you. And there were all across. There were the 15 TDs that had voted consistently against the bills. Were all re-elected. I mean, your neighbour in Louth, Peter Fitzpatrick, I was amazed. Honest to God, of all of them, I didn't think that he had a SCOBY, as they would say. And to me that reflected that there was, at this very late stage, and maybe a beginning of a maturing in that vote, a recognition that you had to actually start working if you really wanted to support these people. That there were people coming out and they were maybe breaking down the other things. So the fact that all those TDs were re-elected, and a significant number of other TDs who had been prominent voices on the other side of the debate lost their seats in maybe surprising circumstances.
It's first of all, it's analysis you're never going to see on the Irish Times. It's analysis you're never going to hear on News Talk or RTE. But the very fact of the matter is that election was notable for a number of reasons. Many of the hardcore pro-choice TDs lost their seats. So people like, obviously, Lisa Chambers, Ruth Coppinger, Kate O'Connell all lost their seats. And the 15 who voted for the human rights to life maintained their seats. And I've no doubt in my mind that there are many people out there who will look favourably in a voting situation on somebody who stands up for the principles on the right to life. But I will also say this, and this is important. I don't think there's one seat anywhere in the country that will be won purely on the right to life. No. I do think that an elected representative has to be better than their competitors on the bread and butter issues that are affecting their lives. And I would have been known, I suppose, my own constituency for the chair of the Save Navan Hospital campaign, the chair of the campaign to get the railway station or the railway line from Dublin to Navan. I'm also the chair of the Save for Meath campaign to make sure we have proper safety in housing estates and streets against crime and antisocial behaviour in Meath. I'm also the chair of the campaign for better housing in County Meath. So, you know, you really have to be plugged in to making sure that you're improving the lives of your constituents if you want to maintain your seat. But there's no doubt, I was going on the doors, and at least every 7 or 8 houses, people mentioned to me, Peadar, you stood up for what you believed in. It's as rare as hen's teeth in the political system. I want to give you a vote on that basis alone. One thing that I will say to you is, one of the reasons why I set up Aontú, and you know, we're positioning this, just and give you a little bit of the background. The membership of Aontú is interesting. The vast majority of people who've come to Aontú have never been involved in a political party before, north and south. The next biggest chunk are Fianna Fáilers, and indeed our phones are hopping at the moment with Fianna Fáil supporters and members really angry with Micheál Martin's betrayal of the party currently at the moment, and they're coming to us. The biggest next chunk is probably Sinn Féin, and then the SDLP, and then we have people from the Greens, from the Labour Party, from even people before profit, believe it or not. Like there's a strain of people in other smaller political parties that no longer find those parties comfortable places to be anymore because of the radical anti-human rights perspective those political parties have taken. So the reason why we set up Aontú is to give a home for all of those. So it's a broad church. It has space for people with different views. The other aspect I set it up was because I knew that in universities, when I had joined the political party, that there were people, many hundreds of students like me, who wanted to be a part of a political movement that had the same values as we in Aontú do. But if there was no Aontú, these people would have no political opportunity at all. They would either not become a member of a political party and therefore be lost to the political discourse and debate and discussion of this country forevermore, or they would become a member of a political party, have to lose their core values to get on in them, or keep their core values and stay at the end of the queue with regards to development within those political parties. And I'm delighted to say that in the last 4 weeks we have set up Ogra Aontú, which is taking an interest of hundreds of students right across the country. We aim to have a common up and running in every university on the island of Ireland, north and south, by the end of the year. We have a debate actually on our own Facebook page on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock with some of the members of Ogra Aontú. The final point I want to make in that is there's a large number of independents out there who are decent, good people with regards to rights to life. The only thing I will say to you on this, and this is my caution, if we all work independently from each other, we're not going to be very strong. A disparate movement on our side of the debate weakens our ability to make change on this. I understand that some people will be of the view that they might be able to plough their fields better, they might be able to maintain their seat stronger if they are independents. But the truth of the matter is, we will only achieve radical change in this country if we work together. And I'll give an example of this. If any one of those other 15 TDs had joined Aontú, we would have got state funding.
Yes.
€250,000. We would have been able to employ about 5 or 6 individuals to work full-time on our political project, and any one of those TDs, they would have been materially benefited by extra supports in doing their work in communicating with their constituents and with the rest of society, and in building a project across the country. So while I do admire and respect people who have stood for what they believe in as independents, I will say to you that if they really want to achieve change, they can't do it by themselves.
You mentioned there that you are obviously North-South party.
Yeah.
I just want, before we finish up here, I'm conscious I'm taking up your time, that we have the situation in the North, I mean, is both very sad, but there's a certain positivity. Because of the failure of Stormont to function, the powers regarding the legislation on abortion reverted to Westminster, and Westminster is now imposed on the North. One of the most permissive regimes in the world, I think we could safely say. Do you find, it's not funny, so it's not comical, but isn't there a very strange irony in the sight of Sinn Féin saying, no, we should absolutely ignore the votes of the people of Northern Ireland expressed in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and go forward with this imposition from Westminster?
Oh, I agree. Like, first of all, it shows the massive change that's happened within Sinn Féin in those years that we spoke about earlier, because there's absolutely no way that the party of 2012, 2013, 2014 would have ever considered doing this. What they did was Michelle O'Neill, Mary Lou MacDonald, and also other members went to London. They lobbied London to develop legislation and impose it on the north of Ireland. So, the party that had expressed, the idea of self-determination, that laws made in Ireland are better laws, was all of a sudden going to London and demanding that they impose a law. And remember, in every single poll, the majority of people in those polls said that the law should be made in the north. In every vote that happened in Stormont, the votes stated that abortion should not be introduced. And here you had a situation that, rather than taking their seats in Westminster, Sinn Féin were taking their seats by proxy to a certain extent, because they were asking Westminster to make these laws for the north of Ireland. And I know of Sinn Féin MPs in the north of Ireland that were furious at this, that drove all the way down from their constituencies to Mary Lou MacDonald and told them that this change in direction in Sinn Féin, this radical difference of approach, was wrong. Like, there was great anger amongst some of the ranks still within Sinn Féin on this particular issue. And then we had the bizarre situation where the DUP actually voted against in Stormont just recently, the Westminster vote. Now, I will tell you this, that many people from the Protestant community have come to Aontú's meetings. Many people of the Protestant community have joined Aontú in recent years. And we have been involved in outreach and reconciliation with people from the unionist community. Because of Brexit, because of coronavirus, and because of abortion, many people from the Protestant community in the north of Ireland recognise that Westminster has a negative effect in their lives, that they too should go down the route of self-determination. And we have tried to model into the idea of Wolfe Tone. Wolfe Tone himself was obviously from the Protestant community, and he believed in an Irish Republic of Catholic, Protestant and dissenter, all working together to build a better nation. And he believed of a pluralism whereby everybody could express their faith and their religious preference openly and respectfully in the society without fear or favour from the state. And that's exactly the type of project that we want to build in Ireland's north and south. And indeed, we have our deputy leader, Anne McCluskey, who's a councillor in Derry. We have a person who's left the SDLP in recent times, Denise Mullen, who's a councillor in Tyrone. We have got massive votes in certain constituencies in both the local and the Westminster elections in the north. And we will be targeting 2 or 3 seats at least in the next Stormont elections to make sure that we can bring about change in Stormont to protect the human rights to life.
Before one quick one. If you want to look into your crystal ball, we are at the moment in the process of a very bizarre process from my perspective of forming a government with Fine Gael and the Greens, where Fine Gael on 34 or 35% in the poll are going to make Micheál Martin Taoiseach on the basis of a fascinating programme for government, shall we say. If you were to put your £5 down in your local bookies, do you think it'll go through, or are you getting ready for an election?
I think that there's going to be a significant backlash within Fianna Fáil, and I think it'll probably break along the same numbers as I recognise in the Kevin Barry Common in UCD in 1993-94. It'll break 30% of the votes will be those with ideals of the Republic, of citizenship, of equality, of economic justice, of the right to life. They will vote against this. 70% will be those who are hungry for power, for self-advancement, for their own ambition, and they will vote for it.
But if that's the case, does that not ultimately speak to the end of Fianna Fáil? Because the 70% ultimately can go anywhere. What keeps a party alive is the 30%.
Well, I do think that you'll see the 30% in greater numbers realize that Fianna Fáil is no longer a vehicle that represents them whatsoever. It's no longer a vehicle of the grandfather or the grandmother of the Cumann na mBan or the revolutionaries of the 21 period at all. And I honestly believe that more and more people will come on board. But it will take leadership. Oftentimes when you're walking through the city, you'll notice that people are standing on the side of the road and they're waiting for the lights to change. But then when one person walks, everybody follows that person to the other side of the road. And people sometimes wait for late leaders to take a decision. And I'm hoping that there are councillors across the country, elected reps across the country within Fianna Fáil that will actually say to themselves that remain loyal to your objectives. When the party that you're a member of is no longer loyal to those objectives, show leadership and stand up and become a member of a party that does represent you. And I have no doubts that if we see councillors, etc., move to Aontú over the coming weeks and months, that the membership base will follow in large numbers as well. And then we will actually have a movement in the 32 counties of Ireland that represents the ideals of the proclamation, that represents the objective of Irish unity, that represents the desire to see real economic justice, prosperity for people, but also an opportunity for decent housing, decent healthcare, education for people as well. And also a human rights value system in the country that makes sure that the weakest, the most vulnerable, those without a voice are actually represented and protected as well.
Well, Peadar, there are actually, I have another 6 or 7 topics that we haven't got anywhere near, but I think if we even attempted to, well, you'd be looking for the door. But so I want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for joining us. Who knows, maybe we'll be speaking to you again on another time and touching on other subjects. We live in interesting times. There are lots of things we can talk about we didn't get today, but today was great, and thank you very much. I'd like to thank the listeners for joining us again, and I'd like to again say, we've been working hard, we've been lobbying hard in the north of Ireland, for example, and in other places on the life issue. We've had some success there. We want to keep that going. There are other issues that are facing into coming up in issues regarding the right to protest, issues regarding they're going to need your support. So if you can help us, if you can click that button, any donation at all would be really, really useful. So thank you again. Thank you, Peadar, and stay safe. Enjoy the sunshine. Get your vitamin D. Take your time. We're told we need it. And until the next time, goodbye and God bless.
It's long full.